The Nevada desert awakened with a reluctant breath of morning heat. July in the Great Basin was never kind, but there was something particularly oppressive about today's dawn. The sky a washed-out blue that seemed to promise both everything and nothing. Heat radiated from the cracked earth in visible waves, distorting the horizon into a shimmering mirage of possibilities. The tourist adjusted his wide-brimmed hat, protecting his weathered face from the relentless sun. At 47, he had spent the better part of 2 decades exploring forgotten corners of the American landscape, documenting what others overlooked. This solo expedition to Nevada's backcountry was supposed to be a respite from the noise of his regular life, a chance to reconnect with the solitary peace he'd grown to crave after years of navigating crowded museums and tourist traps. The past 5 years had been particularly difficult. The separation from his wife had left him rudderless, their shared passion for exploration fracturing under the weight of diverging priorities. Their teenage son had chosen to stay with his mother in Seattle, leaving the tourist with alternating weekends and a persistent hollow feeling in his chest. His camera had become both shield and sword, a way to process the world without engaging with its messier emotions. He took a swig from his canteen, the lukewarm water doing little to refresh him. 20 years of amateur photography and travel writing had taught him to recognize the subtle differences between regions, how the quality of light changed, how shadows fell, how the very air seemed to carry distinct memories depending on where you stood. Nevada had always called to him with its vast emptiness, a place where history sat exposed on the surface, baking in the sun. Should have started earlier, he muttered to himself, checking his GPS coordinates against the weathered topographic map. He was 3 miles east of the last marked road, in a stretch of public land that straddled the boundary between 2 counties. The area had once been traversed by mining railways, connecting boom towns that had flourished and died within the span of a generation. Now only traces remained, testament to human ambition and its inevitable surrender to time. Something felt off about the landscape today. The tourist had learned to trust his instincts during his years of wandering. There was an unnatural stillness in the air. No distant call of ravens, no skittering of lizards across the sun-baked rocks. Even the wind seemed to have abandoned this particular corner of the desert. His boots crunched against the mix of sand and gravel, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. He paused to adjust his pack, containing his professional camera equipment, extra water, emergency supplies, and the small notebook where he meticulously recorded his observations. The habit had started as research for his travel blog but had evolved into something more personal, a dialogue with himself about what he witnessed in these forgotten places. The desert stretched before him, a canvas of rust and amber punctuated by the occasional scrubby sagebrush. In the distance, low mountains created a jagged horizon line, their slopes striped with geological time. This was what drew him to places like this, the visible layering of history, both natural and human, coexisting in a landscape that forgave nothing and preserved everything. His attention was drawn to a patch of ground that seemed different from its surroundings, a slight depression perhaps, or a change in the vegetation pattern. Experience had taught him that such anomalies often indicated human intervention, the earth still bearing the memory of disturbance decades or even centuries later. The tourist adjusted his route, curiosity piqued. The sun climbed higher as he picked his way across the terrain, his practiced eye noting the subtle signs of an old route. Not quite a road, but a path that had once seen regular use. Without fully realizing it, he had begun following what might have been an access trail, long abandoned but still faintly visible to those who knew how to look. As he crested a slight rise, the landscape opened before him like a revelation. The ground sloped gently downward into a natural depression that would be invisible until you were nearly upon it. And there, half buried in decades of accumulated sand and debris, lay the unmistakable form of an old train car, its once proud silhouette now a decaying monument to forgotten purpose. The tourist felt the familiar flutter of discovery in his chest, that moment when the landscape suddenly transformed from mere scenery into story. He reached for his camera instinctively, already composing the shot in his mind, already wondering about the circumstances that had stranded this relic so far from any visible tracks. What he didn't yet know was that this moment marked the boundary between everything that came before and everything that would follow. The line between the man he had been this morning and the man he would become was as distinct and unchangeable as the horizon cutting across the Nevada sky. The tourist approached the train car with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space. Years of exploring abandoned sites had taught him respect, not just for the physical dangers of deteriorating structures, but for the stories embedded within them. This wasn't just a forgotten piece of metal, it was a fragment of history, separated from its narrative. The car lay at an angle, its forward section partially buried in the sandy soil. Desert winds had scoured the paint to a ghost of its original color, but the tourist could make out the faded remnants of what might have been a company logo on the visible side. The windows were long gone, leaving rectangular openings like empty eyes staring blindly at the relentless sky. "Must be from the mining era," he murmured, circling the wreck at a cautious distance, capturing preliminary photographs. The style suggested early 20th century, perhaps 1920s or 1930s, but the level of deterioration made precise dating difficult without closer inspection. He approached the rear of the car, where the door hung partially open, twisted on its hinges. The metal groaned softly in the warming air, a sound so unexpected in the silence that it sent a chill down his spine despite the growing heat of the day. His heart rate quickened as he shined his flashlight into the dark interior, revealing a space stripped of most furnishings, but still recognizably a passenger car rather than freight. The beam of light caught something reflective inside, a detail that didn't align with the decades of abandonment evident in the rest of the scene. The tourist hesitated, years of solitary exploration having instilled a healthy caution. But curiosity, the driving force behind his 20 years of wandering, ultimately won out. He pulled a dust mask from his pack and slipped it over his face before entering. The interior was in better condition than he'd expected, protected somewhat from the elements. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through the broken windows. The floor had partially collapsed in the forward section, revealing a darkness beneath that his flashlight couldn't fully penetrate. "Hello?" he called out, more from habit than expectation. His voice sounded flat and muffled in the enclosed space. Something gleamed near the collapsed section, a modern padlock securing a hatch that clearly didn't belong to the original train car. The incongruity made his pulse quicken. This wasn't just abandonment. This was adaptation, repurposing. Someone had modified this relic, and relatively recently. The tourist's breath caught as he directed his flashlight beam through the gaps in the collapsed flooring. Below, he could make out what appeared to be a constructed space, not natural geology, but something deliberately created. Metal reflected his light back at him. Shelving, perhaps, or equipment. He photographed the padlocked hatch from multiple angles, documenting the incongruity of new security on an ancient ruin. The lock itself showed signs of regular use. The shackle was clean of the rust that covered every other metal surface in the car. His professional instincts took over as he documented the scene methodically, but another part of his mind was already spinning with questions. Who would secure an abandoned train car in the middle of nowhere? What could possibly be valuable enough to protect in this forsaken place? The collapsed section of floor had created an opening large enough for him to see more of what lay beneath, but too small to fit through. His flashlight revealed glimpses of a chamber that extended beyond the footprint of the train car itself, suggesting that the vehicle had been deliberately placed to conceal an entrance to something underground. As he leaned forward to get a better angle for a photograph, the weakened floorboards creaked ominously beneath his weight. The tourist froze, suddenly aware of the precariousness of his position. The boards held, but the warning was clear. This structure was far from stable. He retreated carefully toward the door, unwilling to risk a fall into the unknown space below. But as he moved, his flashlight caught something that made him stop mid-step. Through a particularly wide gap in the floorboards, he could see what looked like stacks of plastic containers, modern and purposeful, arranged with methodical precision. The tourist's mind raced with possibilities, none of them innocent. Illegal dumping? Drug production? Weapons storage? Whatever lay beneath this abandoned train car, it was clearly something someone wanted to keep hidden. His mouth went dry as the implications settled in his stomach like lead. This wasn't just an interesting historical site anymore. It was potentially dangerous. He should leave, report his finding to the proper authorities, let professionals handle whatever this was. But 2 decades of documenting forgotten places had ingrained in him a responsibility to the stories they contained. If he walked away now, would anyone else ever connect these dots? Would the mystery beneath the train car remain buried in bureaucracy, just another report filed and forgotten? The tourist exited the train car, blinking as his eyes readjusted to the harsh sunlight. The desert stretched around him, empty and indifferent. He was at least 3 hours from the nearest town, with no cell service and only his satellite GPS to connect him to the wider world. He checked his watch, barely noon. He had time to document more thoroughly, to gather information that would make authorities take his report seriously. With renewed determination, he unpacked his professional camera and began a systematic survey of the site, recording every detail with the precision that had earned him respect in amateur archaeological circles. What he had stumbled upon was clearly more than just a historical curiosity. It was a mystery with contemporary implications, one that had literally been buried beneath the weight of history, waiting for someone observant enough to notice the incongruities that hinted at its presence. The tourist didn't know it yet, but he had just stepped into a story much larger and more dangerous than any he had documented before. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the tourist returned to his vehicle, parked nearly 2 miles away at the end of an unmarked dirt road. His mind raced with the implications of what he'd discovered, cataloging the evidence with the methodical precision he'd developed over years of documentation. Back at his dust-covered SUV, he retrieved additional equipment, a more powerful flashlight, a compact drone for aerial photography, and a small toolkit that had proven useful in countless explorations. Professional habit drove him to prepare thoroughly, even as another part of his mind warned him of potential dangers. Just documentation, he reassured himself, filling a secondary water bottle and checking the charge on his satellite phone. Get the evidence, then alert the authorities. The return journey to the train car seemed faster, his feet finding the easiest path through the rugged terrain, with the confidence of someone who had spent decades reading landscapes. The afternoon light cast the scene in different relief, revealing details he'd missed earlier, like the faint traces of tire tracks leading to and from the site, partially erased by wind but still visible to his experienced eye. He set up the drone first, capturing aerial footage of the train car and its surroundings. From above, the deliberate positioning of the relic became even more apparent, situated precisely over what appeared to be a man-made depression in the earth, invisible from ground level unless you knew exactly what to look for. With mounting unease, the tourist returned to the train car's interior, moving more cautiously this time, testing each step before committing his weight. The collapsed section seemed to have settled, no longer groaning under pressure. Using his extended flashlight, he was able to illuminate more of the chamber below. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. This was no historical remnant, but an active storage facility of some kind. Modern plastic containers were stacked against one wall, their manufacturing labels clearly visible despite the distance. A metal shelving unit held what appeared to be electronic equipment, though its specific purpose remained unclear. Most disturbing was a desk with what looked like logbooks and a modern battery-powered lamp. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. The tourist photographed everything he could see, using his camera's zoom to capture details his eye might miss. As he documented the scene, he noticed something he had overlooked during his first inspection. A partial footprint in the dust near the padlocked hatch, its tread pattern fresh and distinct. His pulse quickened. The footprint couldn't be more than a few days old, the edges still crisp in the fine dust that covered everything else with uniform stillness. Someone had accessed this place within the past week, perhaps even more recently. Moving carefully around the collapsed section, he examined the rest of the car's interior. In a corner furthest from the entrance, partially hidden by a fallen panel, he discovered a stack of what appeared to be waterproof document cases, the kind used for transporting sensitive materials securely. One had fallen open, revealing the corner of what looked like maps or schematics. The tourist couldn't make out specific details from his position, but the modern printing and paper quality were unmistakable. This wasn't historical documentation. These were contemporary materials. Near the cases lay an item so incongruous it took him a moment to process. A smartphone charger, its cord neatly coiled, plugged into nothing. The presence of such a mundane, everyday object in this setting struck him as profoundly unsettling. Concrete evidence that whoever used this place moved between this hidden world and ordinary life with disturbing ease. He spent nearly 2 hours documenting everything he could without disturbing the scene, fighting the growing certainty that he had stumbled upon something illegal. Drug trafficking seemed the most likely explanation given the remote location, but the presence of electronic equipment and documents suggested something potentially more complex. By late afternoon, with the sun beginning its westward descent, The tourist had gathered what he considered sufficient evidence to warrant official investigation. He made his way back to his vehicle and used his satellite phone to look up the contact information for the nearest law enforcement office, the county sheriff's department, located in a small town about 40 miles southeast of his current position. The call connected after several attempts, the signal wavering in the remote location. County Sheriff's Office. How can I direct your call? The receptionist's voice sounded tinny and distant. I need to report a discovery of what might be an illegal operation, the tourist explained, choosing his words carefully. I found what appears to be a hidden storage facility beneath an abandoned train car on public land. A pause. Can you be more specific about what you found, sir? Modern storage containers, electronic equipment, recent footprints. The train car has been deliberately positioned to hide an underground space. I have photographs and coordinates. The receptionist's tone shifted subtly, becoming more formal. I'll transfer you to Deputy Reynolds. Please hold. After a long silence, a male voice came on the line. This is Deputy Reynolds. I understand you found something suspicious? The tourist repeated his explanation, adding details about the location and what he had documented. And you're certain these aren't just old mining operations? That area has a lot of historical activity, the deputy said, skepticism evident in his voice. I've been documenting historical sites for over 20 years, the tourist replied, an edge creeping into his voice. I know the difference between historical artifacts and modern equipment. This is active, recent, and deliberately hidden. All right, sir. I'll make a note of your report. We can send someone out to check the location within the next few days. We're short-staffed at the moment with the county fair coming up. The tourist felt frustration building. This isn't some abandoned campsite. There's sophisticated equipment down there, locked up and hidden. Doesn't that warrant immediate investigation? Without clear evidence of immediate danger or ongoing criminal activity, we prioritize based on available resources, the deputy explained with practiced patience. If you'd like to come into the station to file a formal report with your photographs, that might expedite the process. The bureaucratic response was exactly what he had feared. The nearest station is over 3 hours from my current location. Can I email the evidence? You can, but I should warn you that electronic submissions go into a general queue. Your best bet is to come in person if you want this handled promptly. After providing his contact information and promising to send GPS coordinates, the tourist ended the call with a growing sense of unease. The lukewarm response from law enforcement left him in an uncomfortable position: walk away from a potentially dangerous discovery, or pursue it further on his own. He sat in his vehicle as the shadows lengthened across the desert, weighing his options. The responsible choice would be to drive to the sheriff's station immediately, but something about the deputy's dismissive tone suggested his report might not receive the attention it deserved. The light was fading fast, and with it, the opportunity to gather more conclusive evidence. If he waited for official channels, whoever used that hidden facility might have time to clear it out, removing any proof of wrongdoing. Decision made. The tourist checked his equipment and provisions. He had enough supplies to camp overnight, which would allow him to return to the site at first light for additional documentation. Perhaps with more compelling evidence, the authorities would take his discovery seriously. As he set up his small tent a cautious distance from both the train car and the road, the tourist couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line, moving from observer to participant in whatever story was unfolding in this remote corner of Nevada. Night fell with the sudden completeness unique to the desert, the temperature dropping as stars emerged in brilliant clarity overhead. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. His mind kept returning to what lay beneath that rusted train car, and to the troubling question of who might return to access it. In the darkness, with only the faint glow of stars for company, the tourist made mental preparations for the morning. He would be more thorough, more methodical. He would gather evidence so compelling that even the most skeptical deputy would have to take notice. What he didn't consider was the possibility that someone else might be making plans for that same abandoned train car, plans that wouldn't accommodate an unexpected witness. Dawn painted the Nevada sky in watercolor strokes of amber and pink as the tourist broke camp. Sleep had been fitful, interrupted by the sounds of the desert night and the persistent unease that had settled over him since yesterday's discovery. The temperature had plummeted overnight, a stark reminder of the desert's unforgiving nature. Extremes without moderation, secrets without context. His satellite phone showed no missed calls from the sheriff's department, confirming his suspicion that his report had been filed away with little urgency. If he wanted answers, he would need to dig deeper himself. The tourist packed methodically, his movements practiced from years of solitary expeditions. By 7:30 a.m., he was navigating the dusty county road toward the nearest town, a former mining settlement that had somehow survived the boom and bust cycle that had claimed so many others in this corner of Nevada. According to his research, the county records office maintained an archive of historical documents related to the region's mining history, potentially including information about railway operations that might explain the abandoned train car. The town materialized on the horizon like a mirage, a cluster of low buildings shimmering in the morning heat, their weathered facades testifying to decades of sun exposure and neglect. Main Street consisted of the essentials: a general store, a diner, a gas station, a small sheriff's substation, closed, and the county administrative building that housed various local government offices. The tourist parked his dust-covered SUV in front of the administrative building, a single-story structure of beige concrete that had likely been built in the late 1970s. Inside, the air conditioning provided welcome relief from the growing heat. A directory on the wall indicated that the county records department was located at the end of a dimly lit hallway lined with framed black and white photographs of the region's mining heyday. "Can I help you?" The records clerk looked up from behind a desk stacked with file folders, her expression suggesting that visitors were uncommon. She appeared to be in her 60s, with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, and a nameplate identifying her as the county archivist. "I'm researching the old railway lines that ran through the county," the tourist explained, maintaining a casual tone despite the urgency he felt. "Particularly interested in abandoned infrastructure, train cars, maintenance facilities, that sort of thing. Working on a photography project about the region's transportation history." The clerk's initial wariness softened at the mention of local history. "The railway archives are some of our most complete records, actually. The mining companies kept detailed accounts of their operations. What time period are you interested in?" "1920s through 1940s, if possible," the tourist replied, having estimated the age of the train car from its design. The clerk led him to a small research room equipped with a microfilm reader, several desktop computers, and walls lined with bound volumes and storage boxes. "The digital records only go back to 1965. For anything earlier, you'll need the microfilm or original documents." She pulled several boxes from the shelves and placed them on the research table. "These contain the Nevada Central Railway records from 1915 to 1942. The company maintained the lines servicing the mining operations in this part of the state until they were abandoned during World War II. There's also a box of photographs from the Regional Historical Society." The tourist thanked her and settled in for what he knew would be hours of methodical research. As she turned to leave, he asked, "By the way, have you ever heard anything about underground facilities in the area? Storage sites, bunkers, anything like that?" Something flickered across the clerk's face. Recognition, perhaps, or caution. "This region has all sorts of remnants from different eras. The mines themselves, of course. During the Cold War, there were rumors about government installations. Some say the mining companies built secret storage facilities for high-value ore. Hard to separate fact from local legend." Left alone with the archives, the tourist began his search. The railway records were meticulously organized. Route maps, maintenance logs, inventory lists, personnel records. He photographed everything potentially relevant with his digital camera, creating his own archive as he worked. After 2 hours, he found what he was looking for: a maintenance report from 1936 documenting the derailment of passenger car number 47 during an unauthorized transport operation. The report noted that the car had been retrofitted for specialized cargo and was operating on a spur line not included in regular service routes. Most intriguingly, the report indicated that after the derailment, the car was repositioned for alternative use, rather than salvaged or returned to service. Accompanying the report was a map showing the spur line, a small branch that diverted from the main track and led to what was labeled as Site 12. The coordinates roughly matched the location where he'd found the abandoned car. The tourist's pulse quickened as he dug deeper. In a folder of miscellaneous correspondence, he discovered a series of telegrams between railway officials and someone identified only as Federal Contact. The messages referenced project oversight and securing long-term storage capability for materials described as sensitive to national interests. Most of the specific details had been redacted, even in these archival documents, but one telegram from August 1937 caught his attention. "Confirm Site 12 preparations complete. Underground storage expansion exceeds specifications. Surface structure positioned as directed for concealment and access. Awaiting shipment arrival. The tourist photographed the telegram with shaking hands. This wasn't just an abandoned train car. It was deliberately placed to hide something the federal government wanted concealed in the late 1930s. But what explained the modern equipment he'd seen yesterday? The clerk returned as he was examining photographs of railway construction crews. Finding what you need? Yes, though I'm curious about something called Site 12. It's mentioned in these records, but without much detail. The clerk's expression changed subtly. That's out in the Wheeler Basin area, isn't it? There was another facility about 10 miles south, a processing plant for some of the more specialized mining operations. It was called Ajax Processing, abandoned around the same time as the railway. Some hikers found it back in the 90s, but it's on private land now. Fenced off. Private land. Do you know who owns it? She shrugged. Some corporate entity bought up a lot of the old mining properties in the 80s. Desert Basin Holdings, I think. They maintain the property taxes but don't develop anything. Just hold the land. The tourist made note of the company name and the approximate location of the Ajax facility. Is there any way to access records related to this Desert Basin Holdings? Property records are public, she replied, leading him to one of the computers. But corporate ownership can be complicated. Lot of shell companies in this region, legacy of the mining days. The property records confirmed what the clerk had said. Desert Basin Holdings had acquired thousands of acres of former mining land, including the area where he'd found the train car and the site of the Ajax processing facility. The company's listed address was a P.O. box in Carson City, with minimal information about its ownership structure. By early afternoon, the tourist had compiled enough historical context to understand that his discovery was connected to something much larger and potentially more significant than random illegal activity. This was systematic, with possible historical ties to government operations dating back to the pre-World War II era. After thanking the clerk, he used his phone to locate the Ajax processing facility. The satellite imagery showed a cluster of decaying structures about an hour's drive from his current location, potentially close enough to visit before returning to the train car site. The drive took him deeper into the basin, along increasingly deteriorated roads that eventually gave way to dirt tracks. The facility appeared abruptly around a bend, a complex of concrete buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence, topped with rusted barbed wire. Faded, no trespassing signs hung at regular intervals, their red lettering bleached almost pink by decades of sun exposure. The tourist parked a cautious distance away and surveyed the site through his camera's telephoto lens. The facility was clearly abandoned, with collapsed roofs and vegetation reclaiming parts of the structure. But the fence looked relatively maintained, with newer sections suggesting periodic repairs. Finding a section where erosion had created a gap beneath the fence, he slipped onto the property, camera in hand. The main building had once been substantial, a two-story concrete structure with loading bays and what appeared to be specialized ventilation systems. Inside, he found the remnants of industrial equipment, much of it removed but leaving telltale mounting points and connection infrastructure. What struck him most was how thoroughly the place had been stripped of anything identifying its purpose. No signage remained, no paperwork, no equipment labels. This wasn't mere abandonment. It was deliberate sanitization. In what might have been an administrative office, the tourist found a single artifact overlooked in the cleanup, a faded blueprint stuck behind a built-in cabinet that had partially pulled away from the wall. The document showed underground storage areas beneath the main processing floor, with a notation referencing transport routes to auxiliary sites, and a sequence of numbers that included 12. The tourist photographed the blueprint, his hands steady despite the surge of adrenaline. The pieces were beginning to connect, the train car concealing an entrance, this processing facility, the government communications from the 1930s, and the modern equipment he'd witnessed. Someone was using infrastructure created nearly a century ago for contemporary purposes. As he made his way back to his vehicle, the tourist noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the facility's main gate, significantly newer than any other signs of visitation. He wasn't the only one interested in this forgotten place. The tourist arrived back at the train car site as the afternoon light began to soften. He parked his vehicle in a different location than the previous day, concealing it behind a rocky outcrop that would hide it from casual observation. The precaution felt necessary after connecting so many troubling dots. He approached the site cautiously, scanning the surroundings for any sign of visitors since his departure that morning. The desert appeared undisturbed, the train car still half buried in the sandy soil, seemingly abandoned for decades. But the tourist now knew better. This was camouflage, not abandonment. Before entering the train car again, he circled the site with his drone, capturing high-resolution video of the surrounding terrain. The footage revealed something he hadn't noticed before: a barely perceptible trail leading away from the site toward the northwest, possibly created by repeated foot traffic rather than vehicles. Inside the train car, everything appeared unchanged from his previous visit. The padlocked hatch remained secured, the collapsed flooring still revealing glimpses of the chamber below. This time, however, the tourist came prepared. From his pack, he removed a small fiber-optic camera on an extendable probe, equipment he used for documenting inaccessible areas of historical sites. Carefully threading the camera through the widest gap in the floorboards, he was able to capture much clearer images of the underground chamber. What he saw confirmed his suspicions and raised disturbing new questions. The space below was far larger than the footprint of the train car itself, a concrete-lined room approximately 30 by 40 feet, with modern fluorescent lighting mounted to the ceiling. The plastic containers he'd glimpsed earlier were clearly labeled with hazard symbols, though their specific contents remained unidentifiable. The electronic equipment included what appeared to be monitoring systems with digital displays, a communications setup with satellite capability, and several laptop computers secured to the desks. Most significantly, the room had 3 doorways leading to other areas of what was clearly an extensive underground complex. One door was labeled storage, another communications, and the third, ominously, containment. The tourist methodically documented everything visible through the fiber-optic camera, occasionally adjusting its position to capture different angles. As he was examining the communications equipment, he noticed a logbook open on one of the desks. Zooming in as much as the camera allowed, he could make out dates. The most recent entry was from just 3 days ago. This wasn't an abandoned site. It was actively used. Pulling back the camera, the tourist considered his options. The padlocked hatch was the obvious entry point, but breaking in would be both illegal and potentially dangerous given the unknown nature of the operation. Yet leaving without understanding what lay behind those doors felt impossible after coming this far. The decision was made for him when the fiber-optic camera, which he'd briefly left in place while considering his next move, captured movement. Someone was in the room below. The tourist froze, holding his breath as he carefully adjusted the camera angle. A figure in what appeared to be protective clothing was moving between the storage containers, making notations on a clipboard. The person's face was obscured by what looked like a respirator or mask. With painstaking care, the tourist withdrew the camera, making sure not to create any noise that might alert the individual below. His heart hammered in his chest as he processed what he'd just witnessed, confirmation that not only was this facility still in use, but it was currently occupied. He retreated silently from the train car, maintaining a low profile until he was well clear of the site. Once at a safe distance, he reviewed the footage he'd captured. The protective gear, hazard symbols, and containment door suggested this wasn't merely illegal contraband storage. This was something potentially hazardous. Using his satellite phone from the concealed location near his vehicle, the tourist uploaded the images and video to his secure cloud storage, ensuring the evidence was preserved regardless of what happened to his equipment. He then created an encrypted archive of all his findings, the historical documents, the Ajax facility photographs, and the underground chamber footage, and sent it to his personal email as a backup. As the light began to fade, the tourist made a decision. He would monitor the site from a distance, documenting who came and went. If this was indeed an active operation, understanding its personnel and schedule might be crucial to unraveling its purpose. He established an observation position on a rocky ridge overlooking the train car site, using his telephoto lens to maintain surveillance while remaining hidden. The desert's transition to night brought a profound stillness, interrupted only by the occasional sounds of nocturnal wildlife awakening. At 9:17 p.m., his patience was rewarded. Headlights appeared in the distance, approaching with deliberate slowness. Their beams extinguished as the vehicle neared the site. In the fading light, he could make out a dark SUV with government plates, though the specific agency was indiscernible at this distance. 2 individuals emerged from the vehicle, both wearing what appeared to be tactical gear. They moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals, conducting a perimeter check before approaching the train car. One carried what looked like standard government-issue equipment cases. The tourist photographed everything, his camera clicking silently as he documented their activities. The pair entered the train car and remained inside for approximately 40 minutes before emerging with the equipment cases, which now appeared to be full. As they returned to their vehicle, one of the individuals paused, scanning the surrounding terrain with deliberate attention. For a heart-stopping moment, the person seemed to look directly at the tourist's position, though the distance and gathering darkness made actual detection unlikely. The vehicle departed as quietly as it had arrived, its lights remaining off until it was well away from the site. The tourist remained motionless for another 30 minutes, ensuring the visitors were truly gone before carefully making his way back to his own vehicle. What he had witnessed was clearly some form of official operation, but one conducted with a level of secrecy that suggested it might not be entirely sanctioned. The tourist returned to his motel in the small town, securing his room door with both the standard lock and the additional travel lock he always carried. The day's discoveries had left him simultaneously exhilarated and deeply disturbed. He was now certain that what he had stumbled upon was significant, likely a government black site of some kind, possibly involving hazardous materials. He spread his documentation across the bed, printed maps, historical records, photographs, and his own meticulous notes. Connections formed between disparate elements: a 1930s government project, a processing facility for unknown materials, an active underground complex in the present day. The narrative that emerged was troubling, suggesting decades of classified operations in this seemingly forgotten corner of Nevada. Sleep came reluctantly and departed early. The tourist awoke at dawn to find his laptop open on the room's small desk, not where he remembered leaving it. A chill ran through him as he approached it cautiously. The screen displayed a text document that hadn't been there the night before. Curiosity has consequences. Walk away. The tourist checked the door and windows. All remained locked as he had left them. Yet someone had entered the room while he slept, accessed his computer, and left this warning. The violation sent ice through his veins, replacing academic curiosity with visceral fear. He checked his equipment frantically. The memory cards from his camera had been removed. The backups he'd stored on his external drive were gone. Someone had systematically eliminated his physical evidence. The cloud backups. The tourist logged into his account with trembling fingers. Access denied. The password had been changed. His email showed similar tampering. The encrypted archives he'd sent himself had vanished without trace. His documentation had been nearly erased, but not his memory, not his knowledge of what he'd found. And in their haste, whoever had done this had missed the small SD card he habitually kept in a hidden compartment of his travel toiletry bag, a habit developed after losing footage to theft years earlier. It contained only yesterday's drone footage and fiber-optic camera images, but it was something. Shaken but resolute, the tourist checked out of the motel, paying cash and offering no forwarding information. His mind raced with options as he drove, ultimately deciding to return to the county sheriff's office in person. The digital intrusion and theft constituted crimes that even the most disinterested rural department would have to acknowledge. The sheriff's station was a single-story brick building with 3 patrol cars parked outside. Inside, a civilian administrator looked up from a computer as the tourist entered. "I need to speak with Deputy Reynolds," he stated firmly. "It's regarding a break-in and theft of property. Deputy Reynolds is on patrol. I can take your information for when he returns. This is connected to a report I made yesterday about suspicious activity at an abandoned site in Wheeler Basin. Someone broke into my motel room last night and stole evidence related to that report." The administrator's expression remained professionally neutral, but something shifted in her eyes. "Let me see if the sheriff is available to speak with you." The sheriff emerged from a back office moments later, a tall man in his 50s with a weathered face and the careful movements of someone accustomed to authority. His nameplate identified him as Sheriff Dawson. "I understand you've had some trouble," the sheriff said, gesturing toward his office. "Let's talk privately." Once the door closed, the tourist explained the situation. His discovery of the train car, the underground facility, the historical connections, and finally, the break-in and warning message. The sheriff listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When the tourist finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled before him. "That's quite a story," he said finally. "Do you have any of this evidence to show me?" The tourist hesitated, suddenly uncertain about revealing his last remaining backup. "Most of it was stolen. That's why I'm here, to report the theft and break-in." So you have no proof of these underground facilities, government vehicles, or historical connections? I have one memory card they didn't find, and the county records office can confirm my research there yesterday. The sheriff nodded slowly. Mr. I don't believe I caught your name. I'd prefer not to provide it at this time, the tourist replied, instinct warning him to maintain whatever anonymity remained possible. Something hardened in the sheriff's eyes. Well, sir, without identification, I can't take a formal report, and without evidence, these claims about government black sites sound concerning, but not in the way you might think. The implication was clear. The sheriff was questioning his mental stability, not the veracity of his claims. Are you saying you won't investigate a break-in and theft? I'm saying we need proper documentation to proceed. Why don't you come back when you're ready to provide your identification and file a proper report? The sheriff stood, indicating the conversation was over. In the meantime, I'd advise against trespassing on private property or spreading rumors about government conspiracies. Small communities like ours depend on stability. Outside the station, the tourist sat in his vehicle, a cold certainty settling in his stomach. The sheriff's dismissal had been too smooth, too practiced. Either he was accustomed to dismissing conspiracy theorists, or he knew exactly what the tourist had stumbled upon. As he prepared to drive away, a young deputy, different from Reynolds, approached his window. Sir, you forgot your receipt. The deputy handed him a folded piece of paper. The tourist hadn't been given any receipt. Opening the paper after the deputy walked away, he found a hastily scribbled note. Not the first to find it. Others disappeared. Federal jurisdiction claimed in 52. Be careful. Looking up, the tourist caught the young deputy watching him from the station entrance, their eyes meeting briefly before the officer turned away. Back in his vehicle, the tourist considered his next move. The local authorities were either compromised or intimidated into non-action. His evidence was mostly gone. And now he had confirmation that others who had discovered the site had disappeared. The logical course would be to walk away, to heed the warning left on his computer and save himself. But 20 years of documenting forgotten history had instilled in him a deep-seated belief in the importance of truth, especially buried truth. He drove to a different town 30 miles away, checked into a motel under a cash payment, and began researching national journalists known for investigating government secrecy. Using the motel's public computer rather than his own potentially compromised devices, he drafted emails to 3 different investigative reporters, providing only vague details and requesting secure communication channels. That evening, as he returned to his room from the vending machine, the tourist noticed a vehicle identical to the one he'd seen at the train car site parked at the far end of the lot. His pulse quickened as he entered his room, locking the door behind him. On the bed lay a manila envelope that hadn't been there before. Inside was a single photograph, a high-resolution image of his teenage son at school in Seattle, taken earlier that day according to the timestamp. No note accompanied it, but the message was devastatingly clear. The tourist sank onto the edge of the bed, the photograph trembling in his hands. The game had changed. What had begun as curiosity about an abandoned train car had escalated into a direct threat against his family. He stared at the phone, calculating the risk of calling his ex-wife to warn her, knowing his communications were likely monitored. The simplest solution would be to walk away, to forget everything he'd seen and discovered. But something told him it was already too late for that. They knew who he was, where his family lived. Instead, he reached for the burner phone he'd purchased earlier that day, dialing the number for a contact he'd made years ago while documenting a different government installation, a retired federal agent who had once, over drinks, hinted at knowledge of classified desert operations beyond the well-known testing sites. As the phone rang, the tourist made his decision. He would not be intimidated into silence. Whatever lay beneath that abandoned train car in the Nevada desert was significant enough that people were willing to threaten a civilian family to keep it hidden, and that meant it was something the public deserved to know about. Hello? The voice on the other end was cautious. This is the photographer from the Groom Lake Documentation Project, the tourist said, using their old project as reference. I found something in Wheeler Basin that people are willing to kill for, and I need help. Dawn broke over the desert with subdued colors, as if the landscape itself was conspiring toward discretion. The tourist had spent the night in his vehicle, parked behind an abandoned gas station 30 miles from the Wheeler Basin area. Sleep had been sporadic and shallow, interrupted by the slightest sounds, a vigilance born of genuine fear rather than mere caution. His former contact from the Groom Lake Documentation Project, a retired federal investigator, had listened to his story with a gravity that validated the tourists' concerns. Unlike the dismissive sheriff, this man understood the implications of what lay beneath that train car. Black sites come in many forms, the investigator had explained. Some are officially sanctioned but classified. Others exist in the shadows, even of government oversight. If this operation involves hazardous materials, and they're threatening civilians to maintain secrecy, this isn't standard classification protocol. Something is very wrong. The retired investigator had agreed to make discreet inquiries through channels still accessible to him, but his parting advice had been unambiguous. Document everything thoroughly, create multiple backups, and prepare as if this might be the last mission of his life. Those words echoed in the tourist's mind as he inventoried his remaining equipment. The fiber optic camera and drone were his most valuable tools now, allowing documentation from a distance. He had purchased a new laptop with cash from an electronics store in Reno, 2 new prepaid phones, and a set of small concealable GPS trackers that could be activated remotely. The tourist's hands moved methodically over each piece of equipment, checking battery levels, storage capacity, functionality. There was comfort in the routine, in the tactile connection to tools that had served him faithfully over 2 decades of documentation. But today's work would be different from anything that had come before. This wasn't about preserving history, but exposing a present danger. He opened the laptop and began recording a video message, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow in the vehicle's dim interior. "This is being recorded on July 17th at 5:43 a.m., he began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "My name is—" He paused, considering whether to identify himself explicitly, then continued. "I'm a photographic documentarian with 20 years of experience investigating forgotten historical sites across America. What I'm about to share may explain my disappearance, if that's what happens." Over the next 15 minutes, he detailed everything: the discovery of the train car, the underground facility, the historical connections to Site 12, the Ajax processing facility, the government vehicles, the break-in, the threats, the apparent complicity of local authorities. He provided coordinates, timestamps, descriptions of every person he had encountered, and instructions for accessing his remaining evidence. "This video and all associated documentation has been entrusted to a colleague from my work at Groom Lake," he explained, not naming the retired investigator explicitly. "If I don't check in according to our arranged schedule, this will be delivered to multiple national news organizations and federal oversight bodies simultaneously. I've also left sealed copies with my attorney and a trusted family member." This wasn't entirely true. He hadn't had time to arrange such extensive contingencies, but if his communications were being monitored, the implication might provide some protection. The tourist saved the video to an encrypted drive and attached a brief text document with additional instructions. Then he sent an email to his ex-wife, casual in tone, but containing coded language they had established years ago during his more remote expeditions. If she received this message, she would know to take their son and stay with her sister until she heard from him again. He hesitated before sending a similar message to his closest colleague, a fellow documentarian who had joined him on projects in the past. The fewer people involved, the safer they would be. But the practical reality was that someone needed to know his plans. The message was brief, following lead on Pre-Huertu railway site in Wheeler Basin. "Significant historical discovery with modern implications. Expected return Thursday. If no contact by Friday noon, send the Groom Lake protocol to the usual channels." His colleague would understand. They had established emergency procedures after a close call during an exploration of an unstable mine shaft years earlier. With communications complete, the tourist reviewed his plans one final time. The evidence suggested a regular schedule at the site, activity primarily in evening hours, minimal presence during daylight. His strategy was to approach from the northwest, following the foot trail he had identified with the drone, rather than the more obvious vehicle access. Based on the facility blueprints from Ajax and what he had observed beneath the train car, there might be additional entry points beyond the main hatch. The tourist checked his watch. 6:38 a.m. Time to move. He started the vehicle, tension settling across his shoulders like a physical weight. The sensation was familiar from his most dangerous explorations: abandoned mining complexes, structurally compromised historical sites, remote locations where help would be hours away if something went wrong. But this was different. For the first time in his career, the primary danger wasn't from the environment, but from other people. As he navigated the empty morning roads, the tourist's mind turned to his son, 16 now, caught in that liminal space between childhood and adulthood. Their weekend visits had been awkward at first after the separation, but had evolved into something meaningful. They shared a curiosity about the world, even if they expressed it differently. What would happen to that boy if his father simply vanished, as the young deputy had suggested others had before him? The tourist pushed the thought away. Fear for his family would only cloud his judgment. The best protection he could offer them now was to document everything so thoroughly, distribute the evidence so widely, that making him disappear would serve no purpose. He parked 3 miles from the site, concealing the vehicle in a natural depression behind a cluster of rock formations. The hike would be challenging in the growing heat, but the terrain would provide better cover than approaching by road. He packed his gear methodically: cameras, water, energy bars, first aid kit, GPS devices, the fiber optic equipment, and the small drone. Before departing, he activated one of the GPS trackers and secured it inside the vehicle. A second was tucked into a hidden pocket in his boot. A third was integrated with his equipment pack. If someone wanted to make him disappear, they would at least have to work for it. The sun was climbing higher as the tourist began his approach, casting shorter shadows across the desert floor. Heat radiated from the ground, creating the familiar shimmer that transformed the horizon into an uncertain boundary. He moved with the patience of someone accustomed to reading landscapes, choosing paths that offered concealment, avoiding ridgelines where his silhouette might be visible, pausing frequently to listen and observe. This was the culmination of everything that had defined his life's work: the attention to detail, the respect for historical context, the ability to connect disparate elements into a coherent narrative. But today's story wouldn't end with a thoughtful blog post or a gallery exhibition. It would end with exposure, confrontation, and, if he was successful, justice. The train car emerged from the landscape like a mirage, solidifying into reality, a rusted monument to the intersection of past and present. The tourist approached with heightened caution, using natural features for cover, stopping frequently to scan for any sign of activity. From his concealed position approximately 200 yards away, he deployed the small drone, keeping it low to minimize visibility. The drone's camera revealed no vehicles or personnel visible around the site. The entrance to the train car stood partially open, just as he had left it 2 days earlier. Everything appeared unchanged, yet the tourist knew appearances were precisely what this place was designed to manipulate. He guided the drone in a wider perimeter, searching for any signs of surveillance or security measures he might have missed previously. Nothing obvious appeared, but his attention was drawn to a new detail: a thin cable running along the ground from the rear of the train car to a small junction box camouflaged among rocks about 50 yards away. The drone's camera wasn't powerful enough to determine its specific purpose, but its modern appearance contrasted sharply with the aged exterior of the train car. Retrieving the drone, the tourist began his final approach, moving from cover to cover with the practiced stealth of someone who had spent decades exploring places he wasn't always technically permitted to enter. The morning heat was intensifying, sweat beading on his forehead despite the breathable fabric of his hat. Inside the train car, the temperature dropped noticeably. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light penetrating through the broken windows, creating an almost peaceful atmosphere that belied the site's true nature. The tourist moved carefully to the collapsed section of flooring where he had previously documented the underground chamber. The padlocked hatch remained secure, but the gap in the floorboards offered the same limited view below. Using the fiber optic camera, he examined the chamber, finding it unoccupied but with clear signs of recent activity. The logbook was open to a different page than before, and some of the containers had been rearranged. Most significantly, the door labeled "Containment" now stood partially open, offering a tantalizing glimpse into the space beyond. The tourist extended the fiber optic probe, angling it to capture as much of the containment room as possible. What came into view made his breath catch in his throat. The room beyond was significantly larger than the entrance chamber, with walls lined with sophisticated monitoring equipment, medical stations, and what appeared to be isolation units. Central to the space was a series of large cylindrical tanks connected to various life support systems. Each tank contained what at first glance appeared to be specimens preserved in fluid, but these were unlike any scientific specimens the tourist had ever encountered. The forms within the tanks were humanoid but distinctly non-human, proportions slightly wrong, cranial structures enlarged, limb configurations different from standard human anatomy. Some appeared to be partial biological structures rather than complete organisms, suspended in a yellowish fluid and connected to monitoring systems that actively recorded data. The tourist's hand trembled slightly as he captured image after image, his professional detachment temporarily shaken by what he was witnessing. This wasn't just a government black site. It was something that would reshape humanity's understanding of either extraterrestrial life or classified biological engineering. Either possibility represented a revelation that powerful interests would kill to protect. Beyond the specimen tanks, a digital workstation displayed what appeared to be a comparative analysis, images of standard human DNA sequences alongside something similar but fundamentally different, with notations highlighting specific genetic markers. The technical specifics were beyond the tourist's understanding, but the implications were clear. This facility was engaged in the study of non-human biological entities with DNA-based structures similar enough to humans to permit comparative analysis. The tourist was so focused on documenting these discoveries that he almost missed the subtle change in lighting as a door opened somewhere out of his camera's view. Only the reflection on one of the specimen tanks alerted him to movement within the containment room. Someone had entered. Withdrawing the fiber optic camera with painstaking care, the tourist began his retreat from the train car. Every instinct urged haste, but experience demanded caution. Rapid movement would create noise, disturb dust, betray his presence. He backed toward the entrance with measured steps, his senses heightened to painful acuity. He had nearly reached the doorway when voices became audible from below. Multiple speakers engaged in technical discussion, their words indistinct but their proximity unmistakable. The padlocked hatch creaked slightly as someone began to access it from below. The tourist slipped outside just as the hatch began to open. From behind the partial cover of the train car's exterior, he witnessed 3 individuals emerge, 2 wearing what appeared to be standard tactical gear similar to those he had observed previously, and a third in a white laboratory coat. All wore respirator masks, though they removed these once clear of the hatch. Contamination protocols are especially important given the latest findings, the lab-coated figure was saying, a woman's voice with the precise diction of someone accustomed to dictating technical notes. The genetic stability is remarkable considering the age of the specimens, but the degradation in Tank 3 is accelerating despite our preservation efforts. Are we still on schedule for relocation? One of the tactical officers asked. The preparations at the new facility are nearly complete, the scientist replied. After 80 years, this location has served its purpose. The original specimens and first-generation derivatives will be transferred next week. The rest will be disposed of according to protocol. The tourist's camera captured their conversation silently, the telephoto lens allowing clear documentation despite his concealed position. He began to ease away from the train car, planning to circle back to his approach route once the group returned underground. A misstep, a displaced stone, the slight sound impossibly loud in the desert silence. One of the tactical officers turned sharply, hand moving to the weapon holstered at their side. Did you hear that? The tourist froze, pressing himself against the rusted exterior of the train car, heart hammering in his chest. Probably just wildlife, the scientist said dismissively. The seismic monitors haven't registered any unauthorized vehicles approaching. I'll check the perimeter anyway, the officer replied. Protocol. The tourist knew he had seconds, not minutes before discovery. Abandoning stealth for speed, he broke from cover and sprinted toward the nearest rock formation, keeping low to minimize his profile against the horizon. Behind him, a shout confirmed his worst fear. He had been spotted. Intruder! Northwest perimeter! The next moments condensed into a blur of sensory impressions. The impact of boots on hard-packed earth, the rasping of breath in a dust-dry throat, the percussive sound of what could only be gunfire striking rock nearby. The tourist ran with the desperate energy of someone who understood exactly what capture would mean. His knowledge of the terrain became his greatest advantage. Where his pursuers saw uniform desert, he recognized subtle pathways, natural cover, opportunities for misdirection. He zigzagged between rock formations, used dry creek beds for concealment, doubled back across harder surfaces that wouldn't hold footprints. The sound of an engine roaring to life signaled an escalation in the pursuit. They had deployed a vehicle, likely the SUV he had observed previously. The tourist altered his strategy, abandoning the most direct route back to his vehicle in favor of terrain that would prove challenging for any four-wheeled transport. He scrambled up a steep incline, loose stones cascading beneath his boots, lungs burning with exertion and dust. From the elevated position, he could see the SUV circling widely, attempting to cut off his most obvious escape routes. The two tactical officers had split up, one continuing on foot directly behind him, the other joining the vehicle. The tourist ducked into a narrow ravine, using the moment of visual cover to deploy his final countermeasure. He activated the third GPS tracker and secured it to a rock, which he then threw as far as possible in a direction away from both his current position and his concealed vehicle. If they were tracking his electronics, this might buy precious minutes of misdirection. The ravine narrowed further, forcing him to turn sideways to pass through certain sections. The confined space amplified his ragged breathing, each gasp sounding impossibly loud. Sweat stung his eyes and soaked his shirt, dust clinging to every damp surface. But the narrowing passage was a calculated risk. His pursuer, wearing tactical gear and likely carrying more equipment, would find it even more challenging to navigate. Emerging from the far end of the ravine, the tourist oriented himself quickly and altered course again, now moving at an oblique angle to his original retreat. The sound of the vehicle had grown distant, suggesting his ploy with the GPS tracker might have been successful. The footsteps behind him had also faded, though whether from increasing distance or the pursuer's own attempts at stealth was impossible to determine. After 20 minutes of sustained evasion, the tourist allowed himself a brief pause, pressing his back against a large boulder and controlling his breathing to minimize sound. His camera equipment had survived the flight intact. The evidence was secure. Now he just needed to reach his vehicle. The remaining mile to his concealed SUV was covered with painstaking caution, alternating between rapid movement when terrain provided cover and nearly glacial patience when crossing exposed areas. The desert had fallen silent again, the pursuit either abandoned or become more strategic. Neither possibility offered comfort. When the tourist finally reached his vehicle, the sun was high overhead, the temperature approaching its daily peak. He checked carefully for any signs that it had been discovered or tampered with during his absence, examining the dust patterns around the tires, the position of small markers he had left on the doors, the interior for any disturbance. Everything appeared untouched. He secured his equipment, started the engine, and began the careful process of extracting himself from the concealed position without creating a visible dust cloud. Only when he reached the paved county road, merging with the sparse local traffic, did he allow himself to acknowledge what he had seen and what it meant. The specimens in those tanks, not human, yet studied in comparative analysis with human genetics. A facility dating back to the 1930s, now preparing for relocation after 8 decades of operation. The implications were staggering, challenging the most fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the universe and the nature of government secrecy. The tourist checked his rearview mirror obsessively, watching for any sign of pursuit as he navigated toward the interstate highway, where he would be just another anonymous vehicle among many. The evidence in his camera represented perhaps the most significant discovery in human history, if he could stay alive long enough to share it. The roadside diner 50 miles east of Reno represented neutral territory, public enough to discourage direct confrontation, anonymous enough to avoid drawing attention. The tourist had arrived 30 minutes early, securing a booth with clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. His backpack, containing all the evidence, remained firmly between his feet beneath the table. 3 days had passed since his escape from the facility. 3 days of constant movement, switching vehicles twice, avoiding surveillance cameras, paying cash for everything, staying in roadside motels under false names. 3 days of wondering if each passing car, each stranger's glance, each unexpected noise signaled the end of his freedom or his life. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman in her mid-40s entered the diner, pausing at the threshold to survey the space with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing environments. The tourist recognized the national investigative journalist from her byline photo. Though her actual appearance was more weathered, her eyes sharper than any professional headshot could capture. She spotted him immediately, nodding almost imperceptibly as she approached his booth. No words were exchanged until after the waitress had taken her coffee order and retreated to a safe distance. "You've gone to extraordinary lengths to arrange this meeting," the journalist said, her voice pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond their booth. "Your messages suggested something of national security significance. What I'm about to show you goes beyond national security." the tourist replied. It reshapes our understanding of history, science, and perhaps humanity's place in the universe. He slid a USB drive across the table. This contains approximately 40% of my documentation. I've established dead man switches with multiple parties. If anything happens to me, the complete evidence package will be released simultaneously to 17 different outlets, including foreign press beyond U.S. jurisdictional reach. The journalist pocketed the drive without examining it. Tell me what I'm looking at before I review it. The tourist leaned forward slightly. In 1936, a train car was deliberately positioned in the Nevada desert to conceal the entrance to an underground facility. That facility has been continuously operated for nearly 80 years, housing what appear to be non-human biological specimens and conducting genetic research comparing their DNA structures to human genome sequences. To her credit, the journalist's expression remained neutral. You have evidence supporting these claims? Photographic and video documentation of the specimens. Historical records connecting the site to government operations dating back to the 1930s. Evidence of active current use by personnel with government credentials, and documentation of them firing upon me when I was discovered. She studied his face, evaluating his credibility. Why come to me instead of going directly to federal authorities? Local law enforcement is either compromised or intimidated into non-action. And given the apparent government connection to the facility, I can't be certain which federal agencies might be involved or complicit. The historical records suggest this operation may exist outside normal oversight channels. The journalist nodded slowly. I'll need to verify independently before publishing anything. The drive includes coordinates, times, dates, and suggested approaches for confirmation. But I should warn you, they're aware of my documentation efforts and may be accelerating their relocation timeline. Their conversation continued for another 30 minutes, the journalist asking precise, technical questions that revealed her experience with investigating classified operations. The tourist answered everything he could, acknowledging the limits of his understanding where appropriate. As they prepared to part ways, the journalist fixed him with a penetrating stare. You understand what you're doing by bringing this forward? If what you've shown me is authenticated, it changes everything. That's precisely why it needs to be exposed, the tourist replied. Some secrets are too significant to remain hidden, regardless of national security implications. The public deserves to know. Over the next 72 hours, the tourist's documentation underwent rigorous verification. The journalist engaged trusted experts to analyze the images of the specimens, historians to authenticate the historical records, and technical specialists to confirm the footage hadn't been manipulated. On the fourth day, the story broke simultaneously across multiple platforms. The journalist's national newspaper, its online presence, an international news agency that had been brought in as a partner, and select broadcast outlets prepared to handle sensitive scientific revelations. The headline was appropriately measured for such an extraordinary claim. Evidence suggests government facility housing non-human biological specimens since 1930s. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with discussion, analysis, and inevitable conspiracy theories both supporting and attempting to debunk the evidence. Scientific communities issued cautious statements acknowledging the potential significance while calling for further investigation. Government agencies initially offered no comment, then pivoted to vague statements about investigating the unverified claims. By the second day, satellite images of the area around the train car appeared online, showing increased activity and what appeared to be a security perimeter being established. Amateur drone footage captured from just outside the newly declared restricted airspace showed vehicles and personnel swarming the site. On the third day after publication, the inevitable happened. A hastily organized press conference featured representatives from multiple federal agencies announcing a recovery operation for classified research materials improperly stored at a legacy scientific site. The careful wording neither confirmed nor denied the nature of the specimens, but acknowledged the site's existence and its historical origins. The tourist watched it all unfold from a cabin in the Pacific Northwest, where he had retreated immediately after meeting with the journalist. His ex-wife and son had joined him there, brought in by the security team the newspaper had arranged for their protection. The family reunion had been awkward at first, but common danger had bridged many of the gaps created by their separation. 1 week after the initial publication, a special congressional committee was announced to investigate not just the facility and its contents, but the apparent 8-decade conspiracy to keep it hidden from oversight. Whistleblower protection was formally extended to the tourist, though his identity remained protected in public documents. From the cabin's deck overlooking a dense forest, so different from the Nevada desert where it had all begun, the tourist watched the sunset with his son beside him, both silent in the face of a world fundamentally changed by what had been revealed. "Was it worth it?" his son finally asked, breaking the extended silence. The tourist considered the question carefully, thinking about the danger he had faced, the threats that might still exist, the uncertain future ahead for all of them. But he also thought about the specimens in those tanks, evidence of either extraterrestrial life or classified biological engineering so advanced it appeared non-human. Either truth demanded exposure. "Some discoveries aren't just about the past," he answered. "Sometimes they redefine our understanding of both history and future. Those are the ones that must be shared, no matter the cost." Somewhere in the trees, a bird called out, a simple, natural sound that seemed to emphasize how much remained mysterious about even the most familiar world. The tourist rested his hand on his son's shoulder, finding unexpected peace in the knowledge that humanity now faced its mysteries together, rather than having them hidden by the few. The train car in the Nevada desert had concealed secrets for nearly a century, but secrets, like the truth they obscure, have a way of eventually emerging into the light. 6 months after the initial expose broke across international headlines, the congressional hearings reached their conclusion. What had begun as a tightly controlled investigation behind closed doors had transformed into televised proceedings as the magnitude of the discoveries became impossible to contain. The tourist watched from the gallery as the committee chairperson summarized findings that still seemed impossible, despite the overwhelming evidence he had helped uncover. This committee concludes that for 87 years, a classified multi-agency operation codenamed Luminous Continuity maintained and studied biological specimens of non-terrestrial origin recovered from an incident in 1936. This operation existed outside established oversight mechanisms, utilizing a black budget estimated at over $26 billion since its inception. The packed hearing room remained silent, the enormity of the revelation still sinking in months after the initial disclosures. Representatives from various federal agencies sat stone-faced as the chairperson continued. "The investigation has confirmed that the Wheeler Basin facility, disguised beneath an abandoned train car, housed 13 complete non-terrestrial biological specimens and 27 partial specimens. Advanced genetic research conducted at this facility established that these entities possess DNA structures sharing approximately 76% similarity with human genetic code, suggesting either parallel evolution or, as some scientists have theorized, potential ancient interaction between these species and early humans. Photographs and scientific documentation flashed across the monitors positioned throughout the chamber, sanitized versions of the much more disturbing images the tourist had captured. The clinical presentation did little to diminish their profound implications for humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Perhaps most disturbing are not the specimens themselves, but the methods employed to protect this secret. This committee has identified 37 individuals who encountered the facility or its personnel over the decades and subsequently disappeared. 7 of these cases have now been confirmed as deliberate eliminations authorized by senior officials within the program. The tourist felt a chill run through him, remembering the photograph of his son that had been left in his motel room, a threat that could easily have escalated had he not acted as he did. To date, 17 individuals have been indicted on charges ranging from conspiracy and obstruction to murder. These include 3 former senior intelligence officials, 2 former military generals, 4 scientists who directed research at the facility, and 8 security personnel directly implicated in enforcement activities. More indictments are expected as the Justice Department's investigation continues. Outside the Capitol, a transformed America was still grappling with implications that extended far beyond criminal accountability. Religious institutions issued carefully worded statements attempting to integrate the possibility of non-terrestrial life into theological frameworks. Scientific communities that had once dismissed UFO reports now faced the humbling prospect that decades of academic ridicule had been fundamentally misplaced. Intelligence agencies worldwide scrambled to determine whether their governments had possessed similar knowledge, triggering a cascade of revelations and denials across the international community. In Nevada, the impact was both economic and existential. The small town nearest the Wheeler Basin facility had transformed overnight from a forgotten desert outpost to the epicenter of global attention. Hotels overflowed with journalists, researchers, and tourists, drawn by the most significant revelation in human history. Local residents who had lived their entire lives without knowing what existed mere miles away struggled to reconcile this new reality with their understanding of the place they called home. After the hearing, the tourist navigated the crowded hallways, avoiding the press gathered in the rotunda. His identity remained protected in official proceedings, referred to only as the whistleblower or the civilian witness, though several media outlets had managed to piece together enough information to speculate about his background. His attorney, provided by a non-profit government accountability organization, had helped maintain this thin veil of anonymity that allowed him to observe the proceedings without becoming their focus. In a small conference room away from the main activity, he met with the lead federal prosecutor, a stern-faced woman whose reputation for methodical case-building had made her the natural choice to head the criminal investigations. "The sheriff from the county jurisdiction has accepted a plea agreement," she informed him, sliding a document across the table. "He'll testify against higher-level officials regarding the systematic intimidation of civilians who stumbled upon the site. His statement specifically mentions being instructed to discourage your initial report." The tourist nodded, unsurprised. "And the young deputy who warned me? Protected witness status." His decision to pass you that note was apparently the culmination of years of suspicion. His uncle was one of the 37 who disappeared in the 1990s after reporting strange lights near the Ajax facility. The conversation continued with updates on various aspects of the sprawling investigation. The Desert Basin Holdings corporate entity had been traced through 17 layers of shell companies to a specialized division within a federal agency that itself had been compartmentalized to such an extent that even its own oversight committees had been unaware of its true purpose. The genetic research conducted at the facility had produced multiple classified breakthroughs in medical science, some of which had been covertly introduced into mainstream healthcare under false origin stories. "There's something else you should know," the prosecutor said as their meeting concluded. "The specimens, they weren't all recovered in 1936 as initially reported. Based on classified documentation we've uncovered, there appear to have been multiple recovery operations spanning decades. The most recent was just 11 years ago." The tourist absorbed this information silently, recognizing its implication. Whatever had visited Earth in 1936 had continued to do so, and recently enough that it couldn't be dismissed as ancient history. "The president will address the nation tomorrow night," the prosecutor continued. "Significant policy changes are being announced. A new transparency initiative for classified programs, enhanced whistleblower protections, and the establishment of an international scientific consortium to study the specimens and their origins. Your actions have fundamentally altered how our government will operate moving forward." The tourist nodded but found no satisfaction in the acknowledgement. The truth had always been its own reward, the only one he had sought. The human cost of its suppression was what troubled him most. Those 37 names representing lives erased to protect a secret too profound to remain hidden forever. As he left the federal building, the tourist paused at the top of the steps, looking out over the capital city where power had always concentrated and secrets had always found fertile ground. Something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between those who governed and those who were governed. Whether that shift would endure remained to be seen, but for this moment at least, truth had prevailed over secrecy, transparency over concealment. In his pocket, his phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from his son. "Dad, they're saying on the news that the whistleblower is getting some kind of award next week. Is that you?" The ceremony was held in the Rose Garden, though early February hardly justified the name. Bare branches and dormant gardens created a stark backdrop against which officials in dark suits and military dress uniforms gathered to formalize what the press had dubbed a new era of government accountability. The tourist stood uncomfortably at the edge of the gathering, dressed in the only suit he owned, purchased years ago for a cousin's wedding, and now slightly too tight across the shoulders. He had argued against this ceremony, preferring to remain anonymous, but the administration had insisted on the symbolic importance of formally recognizing a civilian who had risked everything to expose a truth the public deserved to know. His ex-wife and son stood nearby, their presence a reminder of what he had nearly lost. The threats against his family had not been idle. Subsequent investigation revealed that a surveillance team had indeed been monitoring his son for weeks before delivering that photograph to his motel room. Only his decision to expose everything through the press had prevented whatever might have followed. The president approached the podium, cameras tracking every movement. The speech that followed was carefully crafted to acknowledge the paradigm-shifting nature of the revelations while projecting reassuring leadership through unprecedented circumstances. Today, we recognize not just the courage of one individual, the president said, gesturing toward the tourist without naming him explicitly, respecting his desire for continued semi-anonymity, but the fundamental principle that in a democracy, the governed have the right to know what is being done in their name, with their resources, by those entrusted with power. The tourist listened with a detached sense of unreality. 6 months ago, he had been documenting forgotten railway infrastructure in the Nevada desert. Now he stood in the Rose Garden as the President of the United States spoke about non-terrestrial biological entities and the government's 8-decade effort to study them in secret. The Presidential Medal of Freedom has been awarded since 1963 to individuals who have made exceptional contributions to the security or national interests of America. The President continued. Never has this recognition been more appropriate than today. As the medal was presented, the tourist forced himself to focus on the moment, to be present despite his discomfort with ceremony and attention. His thoughts drifted to those who had encountered the facility before him, those who had disappeared, those whose curiosity had been met with elimination rather than recognition. This moment belonged more to them than to him. The formal portion of the ceremony concluded, transitioning to a reception where officials and invited guests mingled. The tourist found himself approached by scientists, military officers, politicians, all with questions, congratulations, or barely concealed agendas. He answered politely but briefly, increasingly overwhelmed by the attention. Finding a momentary reprieve in a quieter corner of the garden, he was surprised when the retired federal investigator from the Groom Lake Documentation Project approached, offering a glass of water rather than the champagne circulating among other guests. "How are you holding up?" the investigator asked, his expression suggesting he understood the tourist's discomfort better than most. "I keep thinking about the others," the tourist replied. "The 37 who never made it to a ceremony." The investigator nodded. "I've spent 3 decades in government service, and I want to believe that secrets are kept for good reasons. But this," he shook his head, "the scale of this concealment, the methods used, it represents a fundamental betrayal of what government should be." "What happens now?" the tourist asked. "After the ceremonies and hearings and indictments, does anything really change? That's the question, isn't it?" The investigator gestured subtly toward the gathering of officials. "Right now, they're contrite, committed to reform. The public is outraged, demanding transparency. But memories fade, attention shifts. The machinery of secrecy has deep roots." "Then what was the point?" The investigator considered this. "The point is that for this moment at least, the truth is known. What was hidden has been revealed. The sacrifice of those 37 lives wasn't completely in vain. And perhaps most importantly, whatever exists beyond Earth now knows that at least some humans value truth above power or security." This perspective hadn't occurred to the tourist. The idea that the revelation might matter not just to humans, but to whatever intelligence had originated those specimens. If they were still visiting, still observing, as the recent recovery suggested, then humanity's response to this discovery might be significant in ways that transcended terrestrial politics. Later, as the reception wound down, the tourist found himself approached by the national journalist who had broken the story months earlier. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. 20 years in investigative journalism, and I never imagined I'd report on something of this magnitude." "I just documented what I found," the tourist replied. "You did the harder part, convincing people it was true." She smiled slightly. "That's the strange thing. The evidence was so compelling that verification was almost straightforward. The real challenge was helping people process the implications. We're still working on that part as a society. Do you think we'll ever know everything? About where they came from? Why they're here? Perhaps not," she acknowledged. "But we're asking the questions openly now. And that's a profound change from where we were 6 months ago." As the ceremony concluded and attendees dispersed, the tourist found himself standing alone on the garden path, the medal heavy in his pocket rather than displayed on his chest where it had felt foreign and uncomfortable. The recognition had never been his objective, yet he recognized its importance as a public statement about the value of truth. His son approached, teenagers' curiosity temporarily overcoming the affected indifference of adolescence. So, you basically discovered aliens and brought down a massive government conspiracy. The tourist smiled slightly at the simplification. I found a train car in the desert. Everything else followed from that. Are you glad you did it, knowing everything that happened after? The tourist considered the question carefully, thinking about the threats, the fear, the permanent change to their lives. The truth matters, he finally said, even when it's difficult or dangerous. Maybe especially then. His son nodded, absorbing this in the way of someone young enough to find such philosophical statements both profound and slightly embarrassing coming from a parent. Mom says we can go back to Seattle tomorrow. Or, we could stay with you for a while, if you want. The simple offer contained within it the possibility of healing a family fractured years before any train car had emerged from the Nevada desert. The tourist felt a surge of emotion more powerful than anything the ceremony had evoked. I'd like that, he said simply. Spring transformed the Nevada desert with a brief but spectacular wildflower bloom, painting the usually monochrome landscape in splashes of yellow, purple, and white. The tourist navigated the familiar road toward Wheeler Basin, noting the changes 6 months had wrought on this once-forgotten corner of the American Southwest. The dirt track leading toward the train car site, previously little more than an animal path, had been widened and graded to accommodate the heavy equipment used in the federal recovery operation. Signs marked with government agency logos warned against unauthorized access. A checkpoint staffed by security contractors verified his special authorization before allowing him to proceed. He had returned to documentary work in recent months, though with a shifted focus. His previous fascination with abandoned historical sites had evolved into a more purposeful documentation of government facilities being newly disclosed under transparency initiatives. Publications that had once relegated his work to specialty history magazines now featured it prominently, contextualizing contemporary revelations within historical patterns of secrecy and disclosure. The train car was gone, removed for preservation and eventual display in the Smithsonian's hastily developed exhibition on First Contact and its Aftermath. In its place stood a concrete platform marking the former entrance to the underground facility, now sealed permanently after the removal of all specimens and equipment. The tourist parked and approached on foot, camera in hand out of professional habit, though no photographs were needed. This visit wasn't about documentation, but closure. The site had been sanitized of all evidence, the underground chambers filled with concrete, the desert reclaiming the disturbed earth with surprising speed. A simple granite marker had been placed at the edge of the concrete pad, bearing no government seals or official language, just 37 names. The tourist knelt beside it, running his fingers over the engraved letters representing lives ended to protect what lay beneath this unremarkable patch of desert. He had advocated for this memorial during the congressional hearings, a permanent acknowledgement of the human cost of secrecy. Some officials had resisted, preferring to maintain the site's anonymity, but public pressure had prevailed. The names, previously redacted from government files and erased from local records, were now permanently inscribed in stone. The tourist remained there until the afternoon light began to fade, the lengthening shadows reminiscent of that first evening when he had discovered the train car. So much had changed since that moment, not just in his own life, but in humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. Yet as he prepared to leave, something caught his attention. A subtle disturbance in the desert soil, approximately 50 yards from the memorial. Moving closer, he found what appeared to be a small area where the ground had been recently disturbed and then carefully restored, visible only because the disturbed soil supported slightly different vegetation than its surroundings. His documentarian's instinct registered the anomaly, but he made no move to investigate further. Some questions were perhaps better left unexplored, some answers better left to emerge in their own time. The government investigation had been thorough but not exhaustive, the 80-year history of the site ensuring that some secrets likely remained buried, literally and figuratively. The tourist took one final photograph, not of the disturbed ground, but of the desert horizon beyond it, where the setting sun cast long shadows across an ancient landscape that had witnessed humanity's brief tenure with indifference. Whatever had visited Earth, whatever continued to visit, operated on timescales that made human politics and secrecy seem fleeting and insignificant. As he drove away, the tourist reflected on how his perception had changed. He had once documented abandoned places as curiosities, Historical footnotes worthy of preservation, but disconnected from contemporary significance. Now he understood that the past was never truly past, that secrets buried beneath layers of time and intentional concealment could emerge to reshape the present and future. His son had remained in Nevada with him, enrolling in the local high school for the spring semester while his ex-wife returned to Seattle to manage the transition. Their shared experience, the threats, the revelations, the public aftermath, had created a connection that years of weekend visitations had failed to establish. They were planning a documentary expedition together in the summer, the teenager showing unexpected interest in his father's methodical approach to historical investigation. Some nights, the tourist still woke suddenly, heart racing, imagining footsteps outside his door or surveillance in the shadows. The psychological impact of having been targeted would not fade quickly, but these episodes were becoming less frequent, replaced by a growing sense that exposing the truth had been worth whatever personal cost accompanied it. As he reached the main highway, the tourist noticed a vehicle parked at the intersection, an unmarked SUV with government plates. Two individuals sat inside, watching as he passed. They made no move to follow, but their presence sent a clear message. Some aspects of this story remained active concerns for certain agencies, despite the public disclosures and policy changes. The tourist acknowledged them with a slight nod as he passed. The game had changed, but it hadn't ended. Perhaps it never would. But the terms of engagement had been fundamentally altered by bringing the truth into the light. The Nevada desert awakened with a reluctant breath of morning heat, much as it had on that July day nearly a year earlier, when the tourist had first spotted the train car emerging from the landscape like a secret surfacing from the depths of time. He stood now on the rise overlooking Wheeler Basin, camera in hand, the familiar weight a connection to who he had been before everything changed. The morning light cast long shadows across the terrain, revealing contours and patterns invisible at midday, just as the events of the past year had illuminated aspects of government, history, and humanity's place in the universe previously hidden from view. The specimens were now being studied openly by an international scientific consortium, their non-terrestrial origin officially acknowledged, though debate continued about their specific nature. Religious institutions grappled with theological implications. Scientists reconsidered fundamental assumptions about biology and evolution. Ordinary citizens looked at the night sky with new awareness of what or who might be looking back. Yet for all that had been revealed, questions remained. The government had disclosed what it could no longer conceal, but the tourists suspected that other secrets remained buried, perhaps literally, beneath the Nevada desert and similar locations worldwide. Truth was rarely complete, revelation seldom total. Each answer uncovered seemed to generate new questions. Each mystery solved revealed new mysteries beyond. His own life had found a new equilibrium. His relationship with his son had been rebuilt on stronger foundations. His documentation work continued with renewed purpose and a wider audience. The threats had subsided as the highest-level conspirators faced justice and new accountability mechanisms were implemented. The tourist adjusted his wide-brimmed hat, protecting his weathered face from the relentless sun, a gesture unchanged from that first morning, though the man making it had been transformed by what lay between then and now. He took one final photograph of the basin where the train car had stood, then turned toward the future that awaited beyond the horizon. Some discoveries weren't just about the past. Sometimes they redefined our understanding of both history and future. Those were the ones that must be shared, no matter the cost. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking discoveries that will change your understanding of history. Next week, the forgotten bunkers of Colorado and what government documents reveal about their true purpose.